Running Sentences presents The Food Critic, a short story. Written and narrated by Michael Henry. The noted critic, Alex Grand, is notorious for his biting words when it comes to food. He prides himself in being an unknown person, as no one is quite sure what he looks like. Unfortunately for him, his sights have fallen on a mysterious restaurant in a rather odd, unknown town. Of course, that is what draws him to this, as he hears rumors of good food. This is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, businesses, events, and situations within this story are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real people, real situations, real events and/or incidences or characters, and/or real people is purely coincidental. Copyright 2022, Michael Henry. All rights reserved. Alex stood at the restaurant podium waiting for the host to come back and seat him. The menu was in his hands, and it was a thick, laminated thing that made the pages stick together even in an overly chilled environment that he found himself in. The AC was on high. He sighed at the thought of ordering some food, as it all looked rather average, as if the pictures that he could pick out were anything to judge by on this menu. "We generally don't do one-person seats, sir," the host had said as they came back up to him, even though he wasn't paying much attention. He looked over and slapped the menu shut. "That is nice, but I think you will want to find me a seat. I tip well, and I can tip you as well if it helps ease the situation. Besides," with a finger he pointed around the dining room, which had maybe 2 other parties sitting at tables. "It is quite empty, and I'm sure your server will appreciate some work to do." The host didn't look so sure, casting her glance back towards the kitchen area. There was a worker or 2 back there, with their arms crossed, looking displeased at him. One of them began marching forward, making the host wince at the sight. A second later, this person was upon them, staring down at Alex with beady eyes. "We are a family restaurant, and we don't serve single people," the apparent server had said, with a wag of her finger. "Noted, and I will make sure that the world knows all about that when I leave a review on your website or whatever latest food review website comes up. But I will also point out and say simply, because of the word family, it doesn't mean that a restaurant only serves more than one person. In fact, if you'd like to join me for lunch, I could use the company." Alex said this, although the looks on the other 2 were not friendly. He decided not to wait for a reply, taking the menu he had and breezing towards a nearby table. The waitress who had yelled at him that this was a family place was not about to allow him to just go off and do whatever he wanted. Thus, a little chase began after him, and he pulled out a chair and sat down at the table he decided was good enough. "Sir, this is not how customers should act," she complained when she came to a stop next to him. "No, it isn't. This is also not how a waitress or staff in a restaurant should act either, so it looks like we're both in the wrong on a lot of side of things, so shall we pretend it is all okay then?" The waitress moved her mouth, trying to come up with some words to say, something, a complaint, anything. It was all hot air coming out, though, with the failure of a voice to back up any complaints that had come to her head. Alex nodded along and then settled in after a moment to look over the menu once again. It took a moment for the waitress to get the hint that he wasn't leaving, and so she stormed off. He figured he would soon have a meeting with an assistant manager or a manager of some sort, and that was okay with him. The whole thing, though, was a great mystery. A place that didn't want customers simply because he was alone? It didn't make any sense to not want a single person, even if it was just a single person. It was a restaurant, and money was money after all. Alex narrowed his eyes as he began to think and worry. Had his secret identity been revealed? It was not good if that was the case, since his whole livelihood depended on secrecy, and a reviewer must keep their secrets. It would not do at all. Questions needed to be asked, but perhaps in a secretive way, so if things weren't revealed, he could keep them at least a little bit of a secret. A new figure was now approaching in a managerial-style fashion, friendly but stiff and ready with plenty of platitudes to keep one happy. It was a man, which meant most of the nice talk would soon vanish. It only took a few seconds before this man stood in front of him, but a fake smile plastered across his face, telling Alex all he needed to know. "Welcome to the restaurant around the ground. I have heard you're making a little trouble for my staff," the man said in an exaggerated fashion. "If trying to get some food for lunch is making trouble, then yes, I am making trouble. I don't think being a single person trying to get lunch is much of a situation to warrant being unwanted within an eating establishment. There's very odd rules you may seem to have set up. I've been to many places who have had no problem with the fact that I was eating alone." Alex offered this, and he didn't try to meet the grin of the man, since it seemed like it would only make things feel all that much more fake. "Well, we have had to institute a policy lately that forbids less than 2 people to a table." "Why?" Alex was quick to ask. "We have found that people who come in as singles tend to dine and dash," the man said with a smirk, demeaningly glaring down on him. Alex rolled his eyes and made sure to grab his wallet, pulling it out. He fished out about $50 and then tossed it onto the table under the careful, watchful eyes of the manager, whose hand instantly, and nearly instantly, snaked out to try and grab at the money, and successfully grabbed it. "That should be enough to cover what I'm eating, and if it isn't, we'll then consider it a down payment, I guess, Mr.?" Alex asked, as he looked up and down the man who was eyeing the money now in his hands. "Thank you very much, sir. I'm the manager and owner of this wonderful establishment. My name is Benedict Grant. Enjoy your meal." This Grant swiveled on his heels and made his way back towards the back of the house of this restaurant with the money clutched firmly in hand. Judging from that, Alex figured the man would probably never let go of that money, but things were at least somewhat settled now. Using this moment, Alex looked over the menu hard, trying to decipher what strange contents were on it. A grand mystery, since the menu itself was rather faded, and all of the words were hard to read, and there were also what appeared to be coffee stains that had somehow gotten under the laminate. Or at least he hoped that was the case, since whatever else it might be, he didn't want to think about as he perused the menu. "Let me see, the holidays are coming up, and usually there's some sort of special at restaurants, and I did hear that this place had specials, so maybe I should go for that," he mused to himself as he tried to look over the faded words on the menu. If this menu had a special section, he couldn't find it no matter how many times he flipped through the 4 pages of the sticky menu that always made a bit of a tearing noise with each try to look at them. He ignored that noise as best he could, so he could continue his search for whatever food he might find. The sound of a clearing throat caught his attention, and he glanced up to see a different woman from the one before. A bit cuter, perhaps, and definitely a lot less angry-looking about the whole situation. "I am your server, Daria. How are you today?" Miss Daria said. He took note of the fact that she seemed to be a bit stiff, though, so while she accepted that he was a single customer, the first appearances of being okay with this whole situation were a mere lie. It would do, though, since it beat having openly hostile workers not wanting him around. Good. I've been trying to read the menu with a little luck and no luck whatsoever. Is there anything you perhaps would recommend?" He asked this as he held open the menu for her to see the mostly faded blank pages, with a few still there images, but not quite there. "Food is good," she replied. "Yes, it was true, the food is good, but which food here is good?" he said back, trying to keep himself from getting a bit snarky, while still allowing for some to get through. She pulled out something from one of her many apron pockets that had some scribbling on it that he could see, but it was quickly to her face so he couldn't make out what it was. And while she didn't say any words out loud at first, she was mouthing them. Unfortunately, he was no lip reader, so he would have to wait for a moment. "We have 2 specials. One is a pork thing, and the other is a Thanksgiving feast," she said, consulting her little note once again to make sure that she got it right. A pork thing. It sounded mysterious, which sounded intriguing in all the wrong ways that it could go. That would make for an interesting review, maybe, but the feast... That's what he'd heard about this place, and what he'd heard it was known for. Ever since last year, he'd been trying to find this place and this feast, and had only managed to get a location recently. It, of course, did not help that the restaurant had no online presence, and even on the online maps that he could find, didn't show it anywhere. A true hidden gem in the rough, with rumors aplenty circling around and around. Alex nodded to himself, and then it was settled upon. "I will take the Thanksgiving feast, please." She looked at him oddly, but nodded and wrote it down on her little notepad. "And to drink. Would you like something to drink or no? I wouldn't recommend trying to eat a feast without something to drink." Yes. I suppose this place doesn't have a nice wine to wash down the food with. And if that is the case, I guess go with whatever the local favorite beer is," he replied. And she nodded to this, and there was something more scribbled on her notepad as she then departed without further word. Alex took this moment to sit back and take in the restaurant, a sloppy place with an uneven floor to step on. It had all the trappings of a diner that had seen better days and was just barely managing to get by. It might be one of the few local places still around, which is why it could stay in operation. Though it was a hidden secret place, so maybe it lived off of that idea? He couldn't make up his mind on the matter as the waitress returned, dropping off a bottle of beer that was unopened, and he found that it did not have a twist top as he did his best to get it open, but he was not having any success at all with it, and soon surrendered to just having it in front of him. A further look around the place was all he could do, since there were no TVs and the only form of entertainment appeared to be listening to the shouts coming from the kitchen area. There was a section of the kitchen that was open to public view, and there was a person in a grease-stained white clothes moving about back there that he could see. They would shout something at another unseen person, and before long, plates began appearing in a warming station. Minutes after that, these plates were being delivered to his table, one after one, until 6 sat before him. A feast, so to speak, with lots of traditional turkey, stuffing, potatoes, cranberry sauce, a variety of rolls, and an apple pie, a rather big one, and also some roasted corn on the cob. Several of those. He stared at this, trying to figure out how much he was going to have to take home with him. It did appear to be a lot here, and, well, a lot was a lot. It would at least make for a good meal for the next couple of nights. His waitress was before him once again, having dropped off this last plate. "Is there anything else you need?" Well, since there is so much here, someone to eat with me?" he asked hopefully. "Wouldn't have to take home as much if someone ate with him." The woman looked rather surprised, but then decided to sit down across from him, which took him by surprise. None of this was going the way he expected it to. Which meant that this was going to be a very interesting review to write up when it came time to do that. How was he going to write up a review for this place? "Are you sure?" "Oh, of course I'm sure. How the hell am I going to eat all of this by myself anyway?" he replied as he poked at a full turkey with a knife. He'd never been good at carving meat, and now he was going to have to ruin this one. He did his best to carve it up and serve it to her and himself. It took a few moments to settle on how much he wanted from each of the feast plates, to put on his own plate, and despite having small servings, his own plate was soon crowded with food. "Tell me," he said as he sat back down, getting comfortable, "why is this place so hidden away?" Daria frowned as she was eating at a rapid pace. She seemed to be starved, and with the way the food was disappearing from her plate, which was a bit weird and concerning, but maybe she was just hungry, and at this rate he might not get to take any home with him. "It's just the way things are here." She said this with a smile, which was a little on the creepy side. He wasn't sure he liked that. "And yet rumors are abound that this is the place to get a meal like this," Alex said as he began to tuck into his own food. He was half afraid if he didn't, she would manage to steal it away from him. "I guess, but I don't know much about that. Why did you come here? Are you some sort of reviewer or something?" She said this as she continued her conquest of the food in front of her. Alex felt a jolt of fear shoot through him at the mention of reviewer. His entire life's work relied on him not being known, and now this? A waitress from the middle of nowhere had spotted him? He tried to keep calm and smile. "If I was, what of it then?" he asked. She shrugged, busy stuffing food into her mouth, but came up a second later. "It's just that you reminded me of someone." The fear crept back into place in the back of his mind. It was going to stay there, haunting him and taunting him with the idea that she knew him. He could plunge forward and ask what she knew, or run away from this distraction. But most of all, his anonymity must remain intact. "Grand, I get that a lot. Can you open my beer, by the way?" he said as he held up the still-closed bottle. She took it quickly, placed the lip of the cap against the table, holding it there with one hand, while her other fist smacked into the top, causing it to pop. She held the slightly foaming beer in her hand as the cap came away. He then took it and took a swig, hoping that was enough of a distraction to get her away from her line of questioning. "Why is this place known for this feast?" "It's what the cooks are good at, and we are able to offer year-round, I guess." "You'd be surprised how many people like having turkey on occasion." She said this and placed her fork and knife down. She was done eating and had done quite a bit of it, and was now looking at him curiously, which is not what he wanted at all. I guess that's why I heard about it then." He offered this rather lamely, trying to eat a few more bites while avoiding questions. "There are a lot of questions coming from you that sound a bit like a reviewer I've read. Yeah, you definitely remind me of a really popular food critic who goes by the name Wandering Ghost." She said this and leaned in towards him, studying him for a reaction. He shook his head firmly and then wound up squirming a little bit side to side in his seat. It never hurt to be ready to run, and he'd already paid, so running and dining and dashing in this case might not be a bad thing. "Never heard the name in my life. It sounds very internety. I don't do the internet," he proclaimed with confidence. He didn't feel such confidence, but at this point everything felt like a big show, just to be able to eat a meal. "No, I think your voice sounds exactly how I read his words. You're reviewing this place, aren't you?" Her voice rose excitedly, and she began rising from her seat, pointed at him, like she was in on it. Alex tried to get her to sit down by waving his hand in an up-and-down fashion. She didn't bite, and was now fully standing up and pointing both of her pointer fingers at him. "You are the famous reviewer who gets everyone talking. Oh my goodness, we're going to be so busy." Daria said this excitedly and was looking about the place furiously. "Oh, the manager is going to be so happy. The people of the town are going to be so happy." All Alex could do was shake his head. His cover was blown, and this waitress wasn't going to listen to him, that he needed his secrecy to do his job. If restaurants knew it was him, then they might try harder to please him and go out of their way to cook well instead of having that average experience. The whole point of a review was to try and get what everyone else was eating and have that average experience. "Listen, I've already paid, so... You're not leaving, are you? Daria asked and took a few steps towards his side of the table. You haven't tried much of our food. It's so good and tasty. Well, that's nice, was all he could offer in reply. She was suddenly right next to him and leaning in to whisper into his ear. Run away. The sudden change in conversation threw him through a loop. What was all of this? He didn't know and stared up at her helplessly. What was he to do, and why did she want him to suddenly run away? She was telling him to eat, and now she was telling him to run away. Why should he listen to her? This place is a sham. We buy all of our food from another place. It's all for show, she whispered continuously into his ear. This was more and more confusing, since why would they do that? Who were they even doing it for? What was going on? There was no one here to impress. Slowly he began sliding off of his chair and began to stand up, nodding along to show that he understood, even though he didn't in the slightest, but this place was too odd. And they already had his money, so maybe getting out of here was a good idea. Why, if I can ask, he managed to squeak out. We lure in tourists to take their money and lives. It's bad here and you better run while you still can. We like to eat people. He bolted for the door. The end of The Food Critic. Thank you for listening.